Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. This week's session, we are going to go on to the next chapter of Talim al-Haq. And the chapter we are going to be reading about and studying will be Wuzu. So far we've covered aspects on belief. We have covered um, we've also covered istinja. We've also covered how to go to the toilet. Now the next aspect is very important, which is regarding wuzu. Right, okay, so regarding wuzu, there's three parts I would say, and sometimes to make wuzu is farz, sometimes to make wuzu is wajib, and sometimes to make wuzu is mustahab. What does the term farz mean? Farz means that it's obligatory in certain circumstances. It's farz and obligatory to make wuzu and perform ablution. Sometimes it's wajib, so again it's compulsory, and sometimes it's optional. So let's have a look in which circumstances does wuzu become obligatory. So wuzu is compulsory for every type of salah. Now whether that prayer be farz, wajib, nafal, sunnah, any type of prayer cannot be performed without wuzu. And the same goes for sajda tilawat. There are 14 places in the Quran Kareem, and according to Imam Shafi rahmatullah alayhi, there's approximately 15 places in the Quran Kareem where after reading that verse you would need to perform a prostration, sajda. So wuzu is compulsory for salah and for sajda tilawat, because sajda is again it's a portion of salah. The second reason why a person would need to perform wuzu is touching a copy of the Quran Kareem. When a person does not have wuzu, and not having wuzu is known as being in the state of hadath asghar. Hadath asghar means a person does not have wuzu. A person is not in the state of ablution. Then any part of the Quran Kareem and anything along with it, whether it be the page, margins, the cover, the binding, they cannot be touched. They cannot be touched directly. So let's say for example a person would like to touch the Quran Kareem with his or her sleeve. It still would not be allowed, because the clothing that a person wears follows the ruling of the body, and because the body does not have ablution, hence touching the Quran Kareem with the sleeve will also not be allowed. If a person would like to touch the tafsir of the Quran, the commentary of the Quran Kareem, and there's a bit of detail in there. If the commentary of the Quran Kareem is more than the Quran, then it would be classified as the Quran, hence touching would not be allowed. And if the commentary of the Quran is if the commentary of the Quran is more, then it's allowed. And if the commentary of the Quran is less and the Quran Kareem is more, then in them circumstances if the commentary of the Quran Kareem is less and the commentary is less and the Quran Kareem is more, then it's not allowed. and if the Quran Kareem is less and the commentary is more, then it would be makruh in them circumstances. So it basically depends on which portion is more. Is it the Quran Kareem itself or the commentary of the Quran? Yeah. So touching the Quran Kareem would not be allowed with your hands or with the sleeve if you don't have wuzu. But obviously, if you use another piece of cloth, a different piece of cloth which is not attached to the Quran Kareem, or you use a pencil, then yeah, touching it with a pencil would be allowed. Now nowadays um, we have a common issue, and that is touching the Quran Kareem when you're reading on a tablet, on a mobile phone. So what's the ruling regarding that? Now there are many opinions. Some are more strict and some are more moderate. But I think the middle way is that if touching the Quran Kareem while it's on the tablet, so basically you can see the Quran Kareem on the screen. In them circumstances, you are allowed to touch the tablet, but you are not allowed to touch the screen. So as long as the Quran Kareem is on the screen of the iPad, the tablet, whatever you have, even on the screen of the computer, then those verses on the screen should not be touched, but the tablet itself can be touched. But obviously, if you have wuzu for that as well, it's much better. However, if a person would like to touch the Quran Kareem while it's on the screen with a stylus pen, so that he can then browse and search for verses or read the verses, then those circumstances he would be allowed to touch the screen with a stylus pen. It would also be permissible to type the Quran Kareem without wuzu. So you're typing on a computer, typing the Quran Kareem without wuzu would be allowed. We are also allowed to read the Quran Kareem without wuzu, and in such a situation a person is not basically touching the Quran Kareem, then it's allowed. Reading it from memory would be fine, even if a person is in minor impurity, meaning he doesn't have wuzu. If a person is in major impurity and basically he needs to take a bath, or she needs to take a bath, then recitation of the Quran Kareem would not be allowed. So those were the rulings for when reading the Quran Kareem. Ablution would be required for a person, would be first for a person. When would ablution become wajib, mandatory? So ablution will become wajib when a person needs to perform tawaf of the Kaaba. When a person goes for Hajj or Umrah and tawaf needs to be done, he or she needs to circumambulate around the Kaaba 7 times, then wuzu again is required. Without wuzu, a person cannot perform the tawaf. When is wuzu sunnah? Wuzu is sunnah before going to sleep, before taking a bath. So a person would perform the wuzu in the beginning of taking a bath, whether that's a normal bath or if a person is in the state of major impurity. When is it mustahab to perform wuzu? Now, I already mentioned regarding the commentary of the Quran Kareem and tafsir of the Quran Kareem. If the Quran Kareem is more, then it's classified as the Quran Kareem. Hence, touching would not be allowed. And if the tafsir is more than the Quran Kareem, the commentary of the Quran Kareem is more, then in them circumstances, wuzu would be mustahab. And it would be actually makruh in a sense to touch the Quran Kareem. Would say makruh tanzih. When a person touches religious books, because they are likely to have the hadith and also verses of the Quran Kareem, a person already has wuzu and it's salah time, so should a person perform wuzu again? The answer is to perform a fresh wuzu, even though one is already in the state of wuzu, is permissible. However, if a person renews their wuzu without making an act of worship, that would be makruh and disliked. So once a person has performed wuzu, and let's say he has not read the Quran Kareem, or he or she has not performed the salah, then to make wuzu again without performing an act of worship would be makruh. So after you perform wuzu and you'd like to renew your wuzu, then one act of worship should be done in between. For a woman who on her menses at every time of salah, it's mustahab to sit down in a place where she normally prays salah and engages zikr, so that the habit of praying salah 5 times a day is continues. The habit of worship remains. When a person becomes angry, it's mustahab to perform wuzu also, because water extinguishes fire, and when a person becomes angry, it's like a fire has erupted inside him. When narrating hadith and when learning or imparting the knowledge of sharia. So this is a kind of introduction as to why and when wuzu is obligatory, farz, sunnah, and also mustahab. Okay, so I sent you guys Talimul Haq this morning, and if you do have it with you, then perfect, because that's what we're going to be using in the rest of the session. Okay, so we've spoken about najasat in the past few weeks, and I did state and I did mention, just to give you a recap, najasat is of 2 types, hakiki and hukmi. Hakiki is of 2 types, ghaliza and khafifa. So ghaliza is the heavy type, khafifa is the light type. An example of a ghaliza is like alcohol, blood, urine, stool. Khafifa, an example, is the urine of haram animals. And we also have najasat hukmi, which is being in need of having a bath or being in need of performing wuzu, which I've just been through. Now there's some key words we need to understand. So najasat hukmi, covered hadath, means breaking the wuzu or bath. Bath as in if a person gets into major impurity. Najas means impure. Khilal, the word khilal means passing wet finger between the toes and between the beard. Farz, sunnah, mustahab, makruh. In one of the sessions, I did clearly explain what these terms mean, but just to give you a recap. So farz means compulsory, so something that has been proven from the Quran Kareem or very authentic ahadith. So for example, eating the flesh of a pig, eating the flesh of a swine is haram, because this is something that has been proven from the Quran Kareem. Sunnah is something which is the practice of the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, something that he actually did or was done in front of him and he did not reject it being allowed. Mustahab is something preferable, and makruh is something which is disliked by either Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And makruh is of two kinds, which I've mentioned before. It's either makruh tanzihi or makruh tahrimi. Tahrimi is a makruh which is very, very close to haram. And sometimes when makruh is mentioned, it means makruh tanzih, which means it's disliked, but it's still allowed. The word nawaqiz or naqiz means something that breaks a person's wuzu. Now, to start from the right beginning, wuzu and ghusl, obviously, wuzu and ghusl will be performed with water. So we need to understand what type of water is allowed. With which type of water can a person perform the wuzu and the ghusl? So, number one, rainwater. Rainwater is permissible because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself states in the Quran Kareem, وَأَنزَلْنَا مِنَ السَّمَاءِ مَاءً طَهُورًا, and we have revealed, or we have sent from the sky purified water, ma'an tahura. So the water of the rain is completely allowed to perform wuzu or ghusl. Well water again is pure. Spring, sea or river water again is pure. The water of melting snow, so if it was to snow and it melts and it turns into water, that water would also be allowed. And water of a big tank or pond, will also be allowed. Now again, with that there's detail regarding dimensions, because the fuqaha and the ulama and the scholars of jurisprudence, they state that if it's a small tank or a small pond and some kind of impurity falls inside that tank or pond, then a person would not be allowed to perform wuzu. But if it's at a certain length and width, then in them circumstances it would be allowed to do wuzu, something we will cover at a later time. Water left over after drinking by human beings is halal. You're allowed to do wuzu with it. Water left over by halal animals and halal birds, example cows, goats and pigeons, again is clean and can be used to perform wuzu and then pray salah, or perform wuzu and then touch the Quran Kareem. One important principle we need to understand is, how do we classify something as water which is suitable to perform wuzu? And the answer is, if the taste, smell and color and name has not changed, then we are allowed to do wuzu with the stated water. So I'll give you a few examples. Now my question is, would it be allowed for a person to do wuzu with milk, for example? Does anybody have an answer? If you have an answer, you can put it in the chat box. The answer is, to do wuzu with milk would not be allowed because the characteristics of water is not there. You see, when water is poured down, the kind of runningness of the water is much different to when milk is poured down. So milk has a kind of more thicker body in that sense. Also, the color has changed, and also the smell has changed as well. So hence, doing wuzu with milk would not be allowed. Another example, if a person was to do wuzu with a soft drink, for example Pepsi, would that be allowed? No, it wouldn't, because the taste has changed, the color has changed, and the name has changed. Another example, if a person was to, for example, put some water in a kettle and then maybe, for example, put a tea bag inside. Would that now be allowed to do wuzu with? The answer is no, because the name has changed. It's not now known as water, it's known as tea. So so they are very important characteristics for water. If those characteristics remain, then a person is allowed. If those characteristics do not remain, then a person would not be allowed to perform wuzu with uh, those certain liquids. It needs to be pure water. And the reason being is because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَأَنزَلْنَا مِنَ السَّمَاءِ مَاءً طَهُورًا. And tahura means you need to make sure that those qualities of water remain. Otherwise, making wuzu with that type of water would not be allowed. Okay, so the next section states with which type of water is wuzu and ghusl not allowed. Number one, all najis and napak water, any water which has an impurity inside it. Let's say, for example, you have a bucket of water and one drop of urine falls in the water. Would wuzu be allowed? No, it wouldn't, because that one drop of urine would uh, pollute the whole bucket of water. Water extracted from fruit and trees are also not allowed because the quality of water does not exist. The water that is extracted from fruit and trees has a kind of stickiness, and as far as I'm aware, it's called sap. Yeah, so hence wuzu would not be allowed. I did say before, and this is a very important principle: wuzu that has changed its color, water that has changed its color, taste and smell, and become sticky because something was soaked in it, again would not be allowed. Small quantity of water which is pure, for example, but for some reason some type of impurity is falling inside it, whether it's urine, blood, stool, or wine, or some animal had died inside the water after falling inside it, then also the water would not be suitable for wuzu and ghusl. Because when a person's body is dead, when a person is dead, whether it's an animal or a human being, that body then becomes impure, and this is why a dead body needs to be given a bath after they die. Water left over after drinking by haram animals, for example dogs, pigs, or animals of prey, that water would not be suitable for wuzu, because the ruling is that those animals whose flesh is haram, those animals who are haram for consumption, their saliva will also be impure. So because eating a dog is haram, eating animals of prey are haram, eating pigs are haram, their flesh is haram, hence their saliva would also be haram. If they were to um, drink water, then the leftover would be polluted, would not be allowed. Water which a cat drinks immediately after eating a mouse is also not bad, because the mouse is impure. But if that cat has, for example, wiped its mouth, it's swallowed its saliva a few times, and then after a while it drinks water, then that water would be makruh. So now you may ask, so why would a person use water which has been drunk and left over by a mouse? The answer to that is it's because there are certain areas in the world where water is very scarce. Water is not available like we have here in the UK. So hence they may be in need of water. So the ruling is if those circumstances are where a cat has not eaten a mouse, then the water will become makruh, and it should only be used in exceptional circumstances. Yeah, the flesh of a cat is haram. To eat a cat is haram, but there's an exception with the cat. So the ruling would have been that the flesh of a cat is haram, so the saliva should be impure. But because the hadith mentions that they are tawafina wa tawafat, they are animals which regularly visit the home. So if Islam were to say, if the Sharia were to say that the leftover of a cat is haram, the leftover cat is impure, it would become very difficult for households to deal with this, especially in countries where um, the doors are open, the windows are open, cats come in and go, they could have eaten something. So it would cause a lot of distress, a lot of problems, especially to those households who uh, who do not have enough food or water in a pot. So hence, Islam has laid down a concession there where if a cat was to leave over food or left over water, then there's detail in there, as I've just mentioned. Water left over by a person who has just drank wine is also impure. So what we've got to understand here is that if a human being, either a Muslim or a non-Muslim, their leftover is pure, provided they have not drank or eaten something haram. So, for example, alcohol, haram food. In them circumstances, the leftover will not be halal. It will be pure and suitable for wuzu. So, in general, the leftover of a human being is halal and pure. So that was detail regarding which types of water a person is allowed to do wuzu with and which type of water a person is not allowed to do wuzu with. Now what we now do is on the next chapter it basically explains how a person is supposed to perform wuzu. So we'll just have a quick look, and if you have the Ta'lim al-Haq, a copy of it which I sent this morning, then it does have detailed images of how this can be performed. So the most important thing first of all is niyyah, intention. It's sunnah to make intention for wuzu. What we've got to understand here is that if a person does not make intention, and if a person does not read Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim before performing wuzu, then the full reward of wuzu cannot be attained. It cannot be attained. And also, making an intention between wuzu or reading Bismillah Rahman Rahim between wuzu, a person would not receive the full reward, because wuzu has a start. It has a beginning where you actually wash your hands. That's where Bismillah Rahman Rahim and intention should be made. On the contrary, if a person is eating, for example, and they forgot to read Bismillah Rahman Rahim in the beginning, they can read Bismillah Rahman Rahim in between, and they will still receive the reward of reading Bismillah Rahman Rahim in between the food. And there's a kind of difference there. So for wuzu, a person should first of all make niyat from the heart that he's performing wuzu to get rid of hadath asghar. Niyat and intention can also be made through the tongue. Hadath asghar means the need of wuzu. So basically, I am making wuzu to purify myself. So on the next few pages, there's basically a practical demonstration of performing wuzu. Okay, so I'm going to stop here, and we'll go through the practical demonstration inshallah next week. Does anyone have any questions?